I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the world's most influential basketball podcast. I am Ben Dietrich. Jordan Rodelli is on vacation, but Andrew Kuo does not and will not take any days off. Coup or no coup, Andrew Kuo is here. What's up?
I'm pretty exhausted, man. I just got done raiding my local supermarket and just tried to hold a coup in my own desktop, to kind of infiltrate and get stuff done. It's been a big 2 days, man.
You did a terrible job cooing.
I didn't want the coup enough. I got into my desktop and I kind of wandered around like John Travolta memes, and then I just exited.
So, there's been a coup.
Alleged coup.
You
Coup
know,
d'etat.
if you're James Harden and you haven't been keeping up with the news, or Tara Reid, who's just catching up with the news.
Tara Reid from the movies in the 90s?
That's the one.
What does she have to say about this?
I don't know. She just tweeted, "Have you seen the news?" or just something along.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Fair.
So
Tara.
we are of course referring to the unrest in the nation's capital, in which hordes of MAGA chud Trumpists forded their way into the Capitol building, forcing the U.S. government into hiding. Where do we start here?
Oh, man. So I was watching this on TV unfolding in real time because I was like, all right, is there going to be shenanigans? Is there going to be shamrocks and shenanigans
Spoiler alert.
with this electoral vote?
There
And,
were shamrocks and there were shenanigans.
Both. Check and check. And then I was watching this unfold, and at first it was like a mob of protesters, whatever you want to call them. Like, the discussion today is about language more than anything. So let's just keep it fluid, right? There were a bunch of people supporting Donald Trump, and then they were just like, oh, let's wander closer to the building. Guys, they're kind of letting us past the barricades. Guys, they're letting us up against the window. Who's going to smash it first? Oh, we're in the place itself. I'm like, I'm Nancy Pelosi. It just happened in succession really quickly, and I was just like, this is weird. This is really weird. Okay, this is weird. Is that funny? Not funny. This is weird. It was a real 2021 moment, Ben.
Yes, people died.
4, right? That footage.
One tased himself. Shot. A couple people had maybe existing health issues that, were, I don't know.
We don't know, heart attacks or something, right?
Yeah, I don't know specifically. A woman was shot. Yes.
Yeah, that footage.
All of that aside.
Yeah.
Very funny. Very, very extraordinarily funny. Surreal. I mean, the images of people in face paint vaping at congressional desks, just bizarre.
It was awesome.
It was so, I mean,
it was
looked
weird.
like so
it wasn't
much
awesome.
fun.
It was weird.
It looked like so much fun.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that without obviously allying myself with the types of people or the political opinions of those who made their way into the Capitol, but that looked like a riot. In the best sense of the word.
Well, it's like if you saw some pictures of some things, you'd be like, "Oh my God, what is happening? Is this warfare?" I'm like, "No, it's the New York Rangers winning the hockey Stanley Cup. It's the celebration." You're like, "Oh my God, that car is burning." It's like, no, the Lakers just won the NBA championship. And when you see that footage, I'm just like, at one hand, I was like, it's hard to understand if there's joy or anger or both, and if they're the same thing. And watching people kind of in this peaking, basically, sort of they're all 17 years old again, and they're all growing 2 inches, and they're all becoming top 3 players, not playing any games. And it's interesting to watch like a group of people with a singular mindset kind of gain access to a new story in real time. And I kind of thought, not to be flippant about it, but I kind of thought it was funny as well, because and I thought about this, and why did I think it was funny? I think it had a lot to do with living in New York and watching our neighborhoods and the places we love like kind of disintegrate in slow motion during the quarantine and pandemic, to the point where I'm like, buildings mean nothing to anybody. So like, if this Capitol building means a lot to me, I love this government, I love this country, I love the way it's set up, I'm happy to be here. But like, symbolically, I'm like, okay, someone's gonna pee in the corner, can we just clean that up and like get back to business? Because this symbol means a lot for sure, and it's what makes it funny. But like, all of our symbols have been kind of tarnished lately, right?
I agree. And my own views are diametrically opposed to the white supremacists with Confederate flags and the, hordes of Stop the Steal activists, rioters, protesters, enthusiasts.
Yeah.
QAnon psychos, like that.
Ravers.
That entire nexus of individuals who was in D.C. for this and then stormed the Capitol are about as far from me politically as you could get. Mm-hmm. But I also do reserve a small amount of warmth for the people letting their voice be heard and felt and putting pressure on a government. So like, again, like that crew is awful. They suck. But I don't know. I also think making the government feel your presence with some physicality, them knowing that they are not in an ivory tower, is not the worst thing in the world to me. Now, I get that our ideas of injustice and oppression are very different, and you can't necessarily have a society where someone doesn't like a parking ticket, so they storm Gracie Mansion. But the point in a theoretical sense is that the government does answer to the people. And even when they're wrong, like, there's a little smidgen of sympathy for their viewpoint.
Yeah, protesting works, all the way, not all the way, but recently back to Zuccotti Park, right? And Occupy Wall Street, and obviously BLM. And I agree, like, I don't agree with any of these talking points of this crew, these ravers, just like having the best K-hole dance party of their lives. I don't agree with anything they stand for, but the idea of protest to a point is like, it's really important. Kaepernick looks great today, right? Like, he did it with the most nuance and the most efficiency of anybody. But yeah, I agree with you. My 90s ass was like thinking about all the Fugazi albums I listened to and all that DC hardcore, Bad Brains, right? The lightning bolt destroying the White House. And I'm like, I have grown to be skeptical of politicians and government just because of the things I was interested in when I was young. And watching this now, I still have a lot of that. I'm like, yo, I don't really love like 90% of these politicians. Like, the symbol of the White House is revered, but like, we can make better symbols than that, and I don't need to clutch whatever hypothetical pearls we have on, but like, I'm like, we can all do better than like preserving the integrity of the Capitol building.
Ranting about the clowns in Congress is like the oldest thing in
the playbook.
Yeah,
it's a pick and roll.
It's a pick and roll. It's something you do around the green egg when the tongs are out.
Now you're talking.
Clowns in DC.
Smoke that pork butt.
But that said, especially with the handling of the COVID pandemic and the way that the American people have just repeatedly been told to fuck off.
Yeah, exactly.
Like look, this group is not for the people. They are actively going against the will of the people. They're trying to preserve the presidency of their waterlogged imbecile king. Like, they are not a pro-democracy group, but in their own minds, they are the people. So, you know,
Yeah.
like
what
they're
is
they're
Steve
there
Madden?
to they're there to circumvent democracy. So like they're not really the will of the people, but also you know, depends
Yeah.
on who you ask.
And it's gone on a little bit too long unchecked. So I don't even think the ideas are nefarious. Like some of these representatives just love being in the spotlight and know how to run good campaigns and get elected. And like I don't know if Lindsey Graham cares more about our livelihood and our happiness more than he cares about him being in power because he believes he's the wisest one to offer.
I mean, that's a charitable reading of Lindsey Graham's career.
Yo, he was in the cipher last night. Did you see him? He had like the clipped mic, and he was just like, he was fully 90s like raucous records, man. He was like, yo, this is what I think about what's happening. I've changed my mind. And he was like occupying like a 5-foot radius of just like, he was going off. And I was like, Tyler Johnson, take notes.
Sabam Sadiq over here.
But yeah, I don't want to pile on politicians, even as you say, it's like the oldest play in the book. But sometimes the pick and roll works, man. Shout out to Mitchell Robinson.
You know, and look, I've been involved in enough protests that I understand what happened there. I get it. You know, you confronted the cops. They let you go through. Well, shit. We're in the Capitol. What are you going to do? Going to go take some selfies on Pelosi's desk? Like, everything they did in there. Look, there may have been bombs planted. That's real. That's real. You know, someone died. But I'm saying that the typical behavior of the people who went in there, they were like live streaming on Twitch and like smoking, you know, Marlboros in the halls. Like they were doing exactly what any moron would do if granted this absurdly surreal opportunity. Like imagine if you were in a group of ravers.
Constantly, yeah.
I
love it.
You've got your Goldie camouflage baggy fatigues on.
It's tight.
Wallabies.
I'm looking good. Feeling good.
You show up to rave at Madison Square Garden.
Oof, yeah.
And security's like, come on in. Or they just sort of are so overwhelmed and underprepared that you are able to just cruise right in to Madison Square Garden. You would go to Jim Dolan's office in your white face paint. You'd be playing Limp Bizkit, vaping, posting live feeds on Makeout Club.
Putting up Susie and the Banshee tapestries for sure.
Exactly. You would do the same thing. Anyone would. So I'm not even really mad at the weird Viking dudes and getting behind a podium and yelling. Like, yeah. That was all very understandable to me. Yeah. That's not to say that there aren't actual dangerous psychopaths within this group. There absolutely are. And someone on Twitter made the point that all this pageantry does seem humorous until it's not. And the Ku Klux Klan was a good example of that. That it was all this kind of goofy spirituality and weird outfits, and then they were lynching people.
I mean, it was an odd thing to watch in real time because I was waiting for something really bad to happen. Like someone just decides like, nothing's happening, I'm bored, we're in here, I'm going to start shooting stuff. And I was holding my breath kind of for hours, hoping that a bomb wouldn't go off because that would be a disaster with a capital D. And like, I just think you're right. Like we can joke about it because we've surveyed this land and we're just like, these guys are scary in a lot of ways. But most of their fear for me, most of the fear I feel about them derives from like internet stuff and the reach they have there. Them like being in Pelosi's room or office is like odd and shouldn't happen. But I'm like, if that's it, okay, that's fine. It should never happen again. But yeah, I feel bad for those cops, man, because they were set up to fail. And there's stories, firsthand accounts of the cops being like, what the fuck is happening? Where's my help? And there was one testimonial I saw on CNN where someone overheard a cop saying like, I just want to go home and be with my family. And I'm like, oh, you guys are fucked, right? Like we're going to roast you for letting people in, but like, I don't want you to die, you know, like, and it wasn't going to happen. Like in hindsight, I don't think like it would have gotten to that point, but it, when I say it's a discussion of language, I know what people mean by coup d'etat, and it sounds very like romantic, right? But this is a bunch of guys wandering in, being like, "How did we get in here?"
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking before when I was saying stuff is funny and goofy until it isn't, and that line, you kind of only know it when you cross it, because to me this was not a coup, this was not a terrorist attack, this was not
there was
an
no
insurrection.
agenda. Yeah.
But all of those things could have looked like this until they were. Like, what if someone in that group goes in there and starts executing Democratic congressmen? Like,
Yeah, that would
could
be
have happened. Someone could have set off a bomb and killed tons of them. Like, you know, it could have been very different from what happened. And to me, that's the worrying thing. It's not that this wasn't a terrorist attack, but this is what it would have looked like, or could have looked like.
I always come back. I was talking about Tiananmen Square yesterday as this was happening. I'm like, when I was a young kid watching that happen, I was just like, the world is a fucked up place, man. And my parents, who were involved in all of that, were just like, you'll have no idea until you get older. But what's happening now is a little bit unprecedented. Like, hopefully in your lifetime, you'll never see this again. So pay attention. Look at all the blood, you know? And when this happened yesterday, it reminded me of being a kid watching that. I'm like, at least, like, we're not even close to that. Like, that was the extreme of, like, human totalitarianism, human, all the flaws of humanity came out, I think, in Tiananmen Square. And yesterday, I was grateful that none of it did. So time to turn to roasting people with jokes.
Well, you know, you were speaking about the cops a second ago, and I don't think that every police officer there was necessarily allowing them to roll up inside. But I do think philosophically there is a complicity there. And that comes from the idea from law enforcement that Trump supporters who are prone to waving thin blue line flags are their allies, that they are on the same side, that they are, you know, I mean, there is overlap between those groups in a heavy way. When BLM was protesting, the counter-protesters are the same ones who were down there for Trump, and they were on the police's side. So when the cops were undermanned, underprepared, I think a lot of that was because there is a sympathy for the political position of these Trump rioters. I don't mean that every cop on the ground was there saying, I'm with you. Like, they were there fighting with their nightsticks. Some of them, maybe not all of them. But we know they opened that gate. We saw them moving metal things to allow people in. There was not a single-minded dedication to preventing these people from entering, as like cumulatively from what I saw. But of course, I'm not here saying cops should have mowed everyone down. I don't think that at all. I'm not an advocate of police violence, but I do think the perceived alliance between police, law enforcement, and this group of protesters is what led to having a non-visible presence, a strategy of de-escalation, a strategy of, conciliation that was incredibly foreign to the protests we saw over the summer.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, in a vacuum, let's say me and you, Cookies, we got hired to protect the Cookies gruel, right? And there was a mob outside, and we were overwhelmed. Regardless of my philosophical standpoint, I would say to you, like, I would pull you aside and be like, Ben, it's not worth it, man. Like, we're protecting this gruel, and we have to evaluate like the value of this gruel over our lives. And I would say, like, Ben, fuck it, like, let them have the gruel. The question, to your point, is why are we there protecting gruel? Like, what are we doing standing there? How did we get there, right? And I always think about this with the idea of karma. Everyone tries to pick up karma when it suits them. They're like, well, I was wrong, but now I'm right. Wherever that begins. And that's been happening a lot with the discourse here, bringing BLM into this. And it's like, well, they were violent and whatever, all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but then, okay, are we just starting at this year? Because they were there because they've been mistreated for maybe generations, right?
And sorry to interject,
Yeah.
the Black Lives Matter movement was incredibly peaceful and the most popular public movement in American history.
I thought that was very successful.
Comparing these two things are night and day. They are completely different. One was huge peaceful marches nationwide, globally, and this was a bunch of dipshits with Twitch live streams barging their way into the Capitol building. These are not comparable.
I love that the first place people went was their Antifa infiltrating MAGA, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, there's a lot of yoke dudes who eat ravioli pizza, man. Those beards did not just like appear magically. Those grayed big beards, like I've seen pictures of anti-fascists who. I like people who consider themselves anti-fascist, but I'm not even sure they exist as a community. And to say that they infiltrated, I'm like, they consumed a lot of ZD burritos, man, for a month, because these are some body positive guys.
Yeah, I mean, Elton Brand could have had a field day.
There's so many championships there rolling into the Capitol building,
combing through those sausage limbs inside Realtree.
I was also thinking, like, at least like there was no when we said there's no bomb, there was no one opened up an assault rifle on anyone. But then I was like, the minute they stepped inside with COVID, I'm like, this is extremely dangerous, right? You guys, 15 of you can't be in a small office running around for like an hour. Like it's not a great idea now. And I'm like, weirdly, that's where the danger was. Like, these guys are all putting themselves at risk.
But right, there were weapons in this mix. That's kind of what I was saying before. We are lucky that no Congress people were executed, but it was in play.
It was so, I think, interesting to see the mechanisms trigger, right? So as they were in session, and then people were knocking at the door, and all of a sudden they were in like these sci-fi gas masks with these like weird dials on them, and I thought it was so interesting. Like, given this situation, how do we protect our lawmakers? And I'm like, oh, we're watching it in real time.
Oh, get in your condom.
Yeah, get in that weird bubble boy thing. Moops, I tell you, it was moops.
But the thing that just final thing that I was going to say about the police was just that looking at the way they prepared for this, it strikes me as a very different approach to how they dealt with Black Lives Matter protests. And I think that's why this was so successful from the perspective of the MAGA chuds.
Yeah.
That the police did not want to fuck with a group that they view as an ally. Mm-hmm. And they took an approach that allowed this kind of thing to happen and was permissive because of an overall strategy, not versus cops on the ground not using enough tear gas or lethal force or something like that.
Yeah, I think, I'm like Clyde Frazier. I have my phrases, but chasing hypocrisy kind of leads us nowhere or to more chasing. But this is a case where, like, it's clear as day, right? And I think the reason, I'm overly simplifying it, but one of the reasons why BLM was important, I thought, was because of this kind of behavior we saw yesterday. And to compare it to the behavior we saw a few months ago in the BLM protest is kind of like framing it incorrectly, in my opinion. That happened a few months ago because of this. To compare them in side by side is not taking context to account. Like, the system is busted. The way we think and the way we see each other is broken, and we can fix it. I think we can definitely fix it. But we saw its most performative maybe yesterday of how wrong we are in treating our citizens, our friends, our neighbors, right?
I mean, I thought it was indicative of how the police department treats who it perceives as its allies and its enemies differently, and that law enforcement in America perceives black people, people of color, people on the left as their enemies. That there is not a impartiality to law enforcement that you would want out of one in, say, a massive nation with a huge criminal justice system and a militarized police force. That it's very clear what side the cops are on and what side they're against.
I'm always confused with this, and it's something I've not been able to figure out because, like, sports, especially, like, you're a fan of this team. In music, this happens all the time. Like, who is punk? And we kind of subconsciously, I think of guitars, drums, someone maybe screaming as the idea of punk. But there's an ethos there. There's a feeling. So, like, are the Talking Heads punk? I don't know. Is Patti Smith punk? She was there, The intent was the same, but the aesthetics were different. And I don't, as I get older, I know less about this. I don't really know what these people want, and I don't really know what the cops want here. I don't think anyone knows. And when people say they do, I always kind of looked at them with skepticism. And because I think I'm really interested in fluidity because we can cross all these ideas within one conversation and one thought. And it is easier to call a band punk, but then it gets complicated. Like, are they screamo? Are they emo? Are they, noise? And it gets really nuanced at that point. It's like, at what point is it even music? Did punk end in the 60s? How can you be punk in 2020? And all these things begin like this wonderful conversation of being a fan of music, but it kind of takes a turn when we're talking about lawmaking and who's our president and who supports him.
I mean, this idea of who is punk is funny because we've seen the alt-right embrace that idea. Like, we're
sure.
punk. We're
It's
punk.
seductive.
We're upsetting the societal norms
rhythm,
and
right.
the political correctness of the neoliberals and the soft boys. We're the punks. Mm-hmm. Everyone wants to be anti-establishment. It's like in the NBA where every team, or at least 90% of the teams, want to be blue collar. We're working class.
Shout out to the Lakers, man. I appreciate their resistance, the resistance of the Lakers. Yeah.
Even Miami, playing amongst Testarosas and silicone butts, are down there like, heat culture is all about hard work.
I know.
God damn it! Look where you are.
I know.
It's America's playground, Latin America's playground.
I know.
It's all about grueling practices and testing your body fat.
New York is enforcers and lunch pails and walking 5 miles in the snow, and you look up, it's all Wall Street people. It's like, we're Wall Street. We're crypto.
Everyone wants to be punk.
Yeah.
But where I thought you were going with that, and maybe you were, and I'm just jumping on your segue, was that a couple of your favorite indie rockers were down there. John Mouse and Ariel Pink strolling around amidst the Trumpists.
The hoopla, the shenanigans. And Ariel Pink was tweeting like a vote for Trump, and people were like, is he joking? And some other people got to the bottom of it really quickly. He's there with a documentary filmmaker, and him and John Mouse are gonna help him score a documentary about Jones, right?
Alex Jones, yeah. Of InfoWars.
Yeah, there's only one Jones in my life, and that's James Jones. But it turns out maybe those two musicians support Donald Trump.
The fact that they're down there for work does not speak either direction to saying, oh, they're just working on a documentary about Alex Jones.
Yeah.
We don't know what perspective that's from.
Yeah.
But to your point, if Ariel Pink is tweeting or putting on Instagram, vote for Trump, removes a little of the fog of war.
And these are two pretty thoughtful people. John Mouse especially takes pride in discussing his work and the context of his work at length to a lot of people's like boredom and eye rolling. But I don't really care their political alliance here. I thought the interesting thing was people really got on Ariel Pink, but like John Mouse, not so much, because Ariel Pink has had this reputation of being persnickety and a very like detail-oriented musician and artist to work with, which he should be because he's a very complex artist. His music is baffling and kind of cool, and I
don't know them or Ariel Pink, or I know the music, but I do not know him at all. But I remember being at a party. I want to say it was during South by Southwest.
Yeah,
and being in the green room, and him and his crew were definitely being way too cool for school.
I mean, he's on so many life enhancers. I think perception enhancers.
I mean, we were down there. I think Odd Future was there, and all, and it was
nice.
It was a cool crew, and they were just being so snotty and kind of like sitting in their little group, side eyeing everyone.
Cool. Everyone has to play their role, right?
Yeah. I had no interactions with them at all. Yeah. That's my only perception was remembering them in a green room, being like, "The fuck are these guys?"
You were in the green. Wow. Were you like, I wonder which player has gotten younger and become a top 3 guy?
I was there crying like Rashard Lewis.
But I guess where I was going with this is like, I don't know if you've had any friends who've been like radicalized by an idea, or like you've known them for a long time and all of a sudden I had this awesome conversation with someone I knew for a while who was like, I can't really talk to anybody about this, but I know there's aliens here and I see them. And I was like, we need to sit down and talk about this. He's like, I don't want to be mocked. I'm like, fuck that. This is interesting. Like, let's go. And he was talking about like the greens and the grays and all the stuff I didn't know about, and how it kind of made his life worse because like he blue-pilled himself.
I mean, this is a partial product of the internet, right? I mean, it's mental illness finding its focus.
I'm not even sure it's illness. It's just like wanting to feel something, because he wasn't mentally ill. He was totally normal. He was the same friend I'd had forever, but he had suffered through like whatever you call depression, and came out the other end being like, now I find myself in these chat rooms. I don't know what's happening, but I really believe this stuff. And if a good buddy of mine came up to me and was like, hey, I'm going to go down to DC to support Trump, I'm like, you've been on the outside of society forever. You're a weird artist. You're Ariel Pink. You make strange music. Even in a green room, you're on the outside. This kind of makes sense to me.
Well, when you're talking about your friend being depressed, and that's why I was saying mental illness, that these are the same, people find routes to happiness, to
community, love, all the whatever you want to call it, right?
Meaning.
Yeah.
In all these different ways, whether it's sports fandom, whether it's political activism, whether it's believing in aliens, whether it's believing in Pizzagate, the internet definitely provides the Knicks. The internet definitely gives you a diversity of options on where to go and where your heart leads.
Shout out to my Knicks hive.
The insanity.
But right, the idea of a subculture is seductive, right? Because you feel like everyone wants to stick it to somebody, and it's the summer of George forever. It's a never-ending summer of George, right? And I get it, and like I do not agree with any of these political talking points of this community. But if I'm always willing for someone to convince me. So far, I don't think anyone has convinced me of it. But like, the risk is always, to your point about it, all of a sudden transforming into something actually dangerous that we cannot like talk our way around. And I think that danger comes to a head when lawmakers say we want to invoke the 25th Amendment and get rid of this president in 2 weeks. I'm like, are you sure you want to do that? Think this through. You sound brave saying it, but if this actually happens, are you ready for the consequence?
Right, because there's a bell curve, and you're already dealing with people on the fringes of a larger societal bell curve. So even within those groups, you have people who are kind of down for the ride, people who think it's fun, that it's a lark, a LARPing expedition. They're going to go down there with their hats. And then you have people who are really about that life. And we can make fun of them as a collective, saying, they're not really about that smoke. And that's why when I saw the police response, I was, a little surprised, because this group was not ready to beef with riot police.
No.
They may have had some sticks or something, but there did not seem to be a whole lot of gas masks or umbrellas or weapons or shields. They were wearing hats and sweatshirts. They were wearing merch. Not everybody. There were others in there who were more prepared for a clash. But again, I didn't look at that group and say, like, they came to fight cops.
No. And this was telegraphed.
But there are people within that group that are, and we've seen, like, the guy in was it Memphis, Nashville, Louisville, the bomb. Where was that? This happened last week, and it's it's been such a non-story that I can't even remember. Yet Nashville, right? Yeah. The guy who leveled like 2 city blocks in a suicide bombing that we just pretend didn't happen. Like, there are people who are very dangerous and have violent inclinations, and they can be seduced into this kind of movement. Particularly, of course, if the president of the United States is shrieking about how he's being cheated out of an election and spurring them into action. It is a uniquely dangerous cocktail when you have it on this mainstream level. And that's why I think you see these guys like Baked Alaska and these other kind of white supremacist grifters in here, because this is fertile ground for growing your movement. You've got QAnon people, you've got, diehard Trumpists, you've got, Nazis. Like, this is a weird subset of society who showed up for this.
Yeah, I always want to ask what people want, right? Like, what do you want? What do you care about? And that flips immediately to, like, well, what do you consider what you have to lose? What do you have to lose? And people make these decisions in their lives as a rolling thing, and those things constantly change in your life. And I look at some people who gravitate towards the Knicks, and I'm like, well, what do I have to lose? I'm like, that's a good question. It's like, should I be a Knicks fan or should I switch to the Nets? I'm like, it depends, where you stand on this. And I think watching people get radicalized for anything, watching a Knicks game with ease and no stress is like a form of radicalization. And that person has asked themselves what they care about and what they have to lose in various degrees. Like, it's not necessarily that heavy. It may be, when you said, it's some people kind of like maybe picking at a scab, like that could be enough to drive somebody down to DC that finds themselves in Nancy Pelosi's office all of a sudden.
I think the allure and power of Trumpism is that it provides an umbrella, and one that has some legitimacy to all these various factors, or factions, excuse me. Mm-hmm. Like, if you say, my agenda is white supremacy,
yeah,
you don't necessarily have a lot of people who are like, cool. But if your agenda is, I'm pro-Trump, and white supremacy is just part of the package, it gives you a way to enter a larger audience. And I think that's the real danger here, is that Trumpism includes all of these awful segments of society, the just vile Nazis and violent grifters, and all these people are legitimized because Trump likes them. And they aren't necessarily put off into a side section of like total psychos. Like QAnons, okay, you're my ally, you're under the Trump banner. We are here for our president who got, millions and millions and millions of votes. Yeah. So I think that's the issue with the Trump element, is that it provides a way to conceal, more fringy elements of his movement.
Yeah, and the fringe part of it is the seduction, right? Like, being the underdog in sports is the appeal, because hypothetically, when you win, you will be validated. But in reality, you are the underdog, and you just enjoy. I'm a Knicks fan, can you tell? You should enjoy where you are in the moment and not always expect to have a release valve. And I think the trouble with what happened in the 4 years with Trump is he was president and he had Mitch McConnell in his pocket in the Senate. So these guys had everything they wanted. Obviously they wanted the House too. But like having the two houses like that was a power that kind of, when your team wins a championship, you're kind of like, you have to discuss this aimlessness, right? It's like, well, we've achieved what we want. It's like, well, what do you guys, is it the wall? Is it the healthcare system? What do you actually care about? And they were like, we just wanted to be president and just like fuck around, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get at exactly. Like, I'm an Austin Rivers guy. Always
Everyone
been
is
Austin
now,
Rivers.
man.
But that's what I mean, right? Like, I'm Austin Rivers. I have this one fringy thing. I just love Austin Rivers. Always have. I'm beating that Austin Rivers drum over and over and over. Actually, I should just make this my Nerlens. But just then
Jordan
it'll come
Bell.
from the
It's
heart.
a Jordan Bell, man.
It'll come from the heart.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Nerlens all day. Nerlens. But now he's on the Knicks, and the Knicks are winning games. I'm like, yeah, guys, what do you think? Knicks, woo! Also Nerlens. Nerlens is here. Knicks. It's just an easy way to make your fringe opinion more palatable to like a huge amount of people. Nerlens has a good game. He's awesome, right? Most underrated center in the league, baby.
He's
Knicks
my
basketball.
guy. Day one, right? Yeah, and I'm very interested and happy and curious as to what's going to happen with the Democrats, because not necessarily because it's the Democrats, because we got the potential of what people can do in response to Trump in the next 2 years is tremendous, but it comes with its own thorns, right? And having all the mechanisms trigger, having the House, now the Senate, and the White House, the House of Representatives, and the White House, is the dream. But I'm like, it comes with a curse, which is there's nothing to brush up against. And throughout history, we've seen this kind of spiral out and poor decisions get made.
You know, I am skeptical that we're going to see the Democrats make wholesale changes. I don't think the core of the party, the ones who really control it, the Schumers and Pelosi's and Biden's and the DNC, particularly agree with the positions of the left. You know, it's easy to say that they would prefer to have the country divided and sort of be locked in war where nothing can happen. I don't think that's true. They want to win Georgia. They want control. They want power. They want that clout. But I don't think that group necessarily wants to bring broad changes to America. They've never seemed like that in the past. I do think there is an opportunity after the results in Georgia for the left to vocalize and draw attention to things that can be done. I don't think that's necessarily going to lead to, say, universal health care tomorrow. But
Yeah.
I think you can say, wait a minute. Why aren't you doing this? There's no excuse. Presidency, the House, the Senate, let's go. You were elected for a reason. Our people voted you in. Mm-hmm. Come on, let's see a little action.
Why didn't you win the championship? Right.
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity at least to extract some kind of concessions, but I do think that the centrist core of the Democratic Party will also be resistant to that. So all in all, I don't know how much will change, but there's at least more of an opportunity with Georgia falling into the hands of the Democratic Party than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah, and I think the optimism is deserved. Like if you didn't like what Trump did in the last 4 years, like here is the equal and opposite reaction, which was surprising to me. I did not expect this. Just to have to mitigate the power of Mitch McConnell for 2 years, for Lindsey Graham for a couple years, for Steve Nash too for a couple years is good. The Democratic Party is not perfect by any means, and Biden's not a perfect candidate. But like, if we pull back a little bit and look at what happened to our government or the Republican Party, it is a Trump stake situation. He came in with like a party that was kind of like just chugging along, maybe depending on how you thought about it, did its thing or didn't do its thing, was in trouble or not in trouble. But he won the presidency. And then like it all crumbled. It all felt like sand going through his fingers, sort of like Trump University. And he came true to his promise of done. I'm just happy that he's out. I think our country is stronger if like the three pillars of government aren't all under one control. But given the other option, I'll take it.
Well, I think that depends on who's in control, because
Yeah.
when all three parts of the government are under one party, they can obviously get a lot done. Unfortunately, when it was under Republican control, they did a lot of bad shit. The Democrats generally don't do a substantial amount of good shit to balance this, so we end up kind of in stasis and then pushed right, and stasis and then pushed right. I get what you're saying. In a theoretical idea, there would be checks and balances and both sides would come to a natural conclusion. But we've also seen the Republican Party shift towards wholesale lunacy over the last 15, 20 years.
The 4 years have really shifted the whole thing.
Right. I mean, Tea Party going forward, they've basically drummed anyone who's even a little bit reasonable out of the party. They've been primaried and ousted. It is a psycho party at this point. So, in my opinion, due to the current circumstances, you can't allow them to have any say. You can't allow them to have even any ability to prevent things from happening, because they are lunatics.
And this is the way to do it, with process, right? And shout out to Georgia. Trae Young Kings, man. Strip clubs, James Harden, his culture has saved. Can we just shout out that video, Get Your Booty to the Polls?
Highly influential.
Highly influential. Not only was it masterfully done, it was something that stuck in your mind. That one woman being like, they're gonna do what they're gonna do, shorty, makes me crack up every time, because there's someone in her life who's they're gonna do what they're gonna do. They're gonna vote for whoever they're gonna vote for, right? And I would like to just credit that video for changing the whole course of our country.
I'm with it, sure. But when I was saying about the lunacy of the Republican Party, the majority of the Republican members of the House voted against the results of this election. You can't say we need some balance with these guys. No. There's nothing constructive that they can bring to the table. They are a bad crew. Not a fan.
I feel like it was an auction mentality. You're at an auction for some fine art, and a piece comes up. You kind of like the piece, but you want to impress your peers. So you're like, I'll bid on it. It goes back and forth. It's like, yep, I'll bid on it. And then you end up getting it. And you're like, oh, I didn't really want this thing. I feel like these Steve Nash 2s that's what they're hedging on. I think we should deny this election result in a state that I don't even represent. They don't really mean it because they know it's not going to go through. They're grandstanding, right?
Well, I think it's also trying to protect themselves in case of a primary from someone even more psychotic than themselves, who can say, this guy, he didn't even vote for Trump in the last election. He did. He voted for Biden to become president. And they're like, can't have that guy representing us. So I think a lot of it is sort of bulletproofing on attacks from, QAnon people, or, the rise of just the most maniacal candidates we've seen in a long time. The Alabama football coaches and the
Saban.
Yeah, Saban.
No Simbin.
Who's it? Tubby Tuberville? His name is Tubby Tuberman.
I'm most interested in Lindsey Graham right now, because he does not give a fuck, man. He's just going to where the wind is, and he's aligning himself to Biden now. And I'm most interested in him because he's just gonna do this forever. And you can call him all sorts of names, like a grifter or a sycophant or whatever. But I'm like, oh, he's a test case. What happens if a powerful politician, just goes with the wind? Can this work for him Probably, right? He could probably do this indefinitely.
Yeah, he's the sleaziest.
I mean, whatever. Or maybe, like, if you were a close friend of his, I mean, his friends have turned their backs on him, but if you were his, like, family member, you'd just be like, Lindsay's a survivor. I'm like, I can't deny that.
True. I would agree with that too.
Yeah.
But, yeah, like, where does serving the country and where does serving self-interest conflict? Like, here it is.
Yes, exactly. Oh, my God. You just made me, that sentence just made me think of Andrew Yang as our mayor. Another conversation for another day, if that comes into play ever. But I can hope. A Knicks fan can hope.
Well, Knicks fans can hope. But let's talk a little bit about Knicks fans and hope. You are a fan of the streaking New York Knicks. Austin Rivers Hive, King of New York.
I've lost like my jewel when they were so and they're going to be bad in like a month, but when they were awful, I was like, Lou Admonson, Lance Thomas, these are my fellas, man. I got love for these guys. Oh, lost by 25 points, whatever. I love them. And now that they're kind of good, I'm like that Wolverine meme, right? Like pawing at the framed picture. But it's awesome. It's awesome. They are not as good, but they've won a few games, and really psyched on these guys, man.
What, in your opinion, has been the key to the Knicks winning games? Because up until a few days ago, if you looked at their offense, their defense didn't really stack up to a good team, and yet they've been pretty competitive. They've beaten teams who've come up against them. You know, they're certainly not going to be mistaken for being excellent, but they are 5-3, and you know, their defense is ranked 7th right now. Their offense is 23rd. You know, like, they are a solidly mediocre team thus far, which is far
wild.
better than I thought.
Holy, like, are we gonna finish like 9th or 10th in the East? Like,
Play
incredible,
bitch.
Yeah, incredible, right? And it's on the table. But to your question, I think what has changed, it's still early, you know, the returns are hazy, but it's a lot of Coach Thibodeau overplaying his guys, but a defensive kind of chaos that I really enjoy. A lot of long, rangy players like Mitchell Robinson, man. I just love this kid. His t-shirt is available in the cookieshoops.com web store. I love this player so much because, you know, at my peak enthusiasm, I would call him a superstar. In reality, he's just a menace on defense, and he is just a joy to watch. I like how a month ago the knock on him was like, does he not care enough? Bringing that back up again. And just watching him on the court, I'm like, he cares more than anybody, man.
I mean, thus far, he's seemed to have gotten better at one of his major downsides, which was being foul prone.
Yep.
You know, he's averaging 3 personal fouls a game in 30 minutes. Like, that's not foul trouble.
Yeah. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that is a noticeable difference in him, whether it's due to fibs or it's due to maturity. I mean, this is his 3rd season. He's still only 22 years old. You know, his ability to stay on the court is just matters. You know, I mean, he went from almost 8 personal fouls per 100 possessions to 7 to this year 5. That is significant.
Yeah, and I was thinking about dishes and how you have a bunch of dirty dishes after a big dinner, and no one wants to do the dishes, right? And this was the Knicks maybe all for 2 decades. I just don't want to start doing the dishes because we wash one, and it's just endless. But all you have to do is start. As soon as you start, at some point you're get to a reasonable level of dishes to do, and your stress will change, and it might be even relieved. This is what happens when you keep your draft picks and just try to draft the best player every year. You miss a lot. I have hope for Kevin Knox. I have hope for Frank Ntilikina. They probably won't have long careers on the Knicks. But RJ Barrett, so not as bad as last year. Mitchell Robinson, I think, is a wonderful fucking player. And these two just playing more games and more minutes have put the Knicks in an area where they can surround, like, your favorite player of all time, Julius Randle, who Tobias Harris has modeled his game after. These players just start doing their damn thing, and by accident they'll win a couple games, and then all of a sudden your dishes are like half done.
I don't know what to think about Randall. From a just pure productivity level, he's been pretty efficient. He's putting up,
He's
23.
beast. He's an all-star at this point.
Yeah, 23 points a game, 12 boards, 7 assists. And he's offensively,
Trade him.
He's doing a lot. Knicks do have an option to keep him for next year. Mm-hmm. So they will have the opportunity to maybe trade him to a team that could see if he worked out and then keep him for another season. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what the market is for Randall because he's a guy who breathes a lot of oxygen. And Knicks fans, despite him putting up 23, 12, and 7, still aren't high on him. I don't know any Knicks fans that are like, sign this guy long term. No one kind of likes him.
I mean, his usage is pretty high. It's 27, but not the highest in the league. Superstars get like over 30. His BPM, even though it's early, is nice. It's 2.7. I love him because he chose to play here, but his timeline doesn't match with any of the Knicks timeline. And the timeline is shrinking, for sure. I think now the timeline is Mitchell Robinson or whatever RJ Barrett is. So it kind of leads Randall on the outside looking in. I don't think Knicks fans like him because he's like a lumbering player. I mean, me and you were joking yesterday. Like, if he adds a little air guitar or like a little shimmy, he's going to win over fans in a minute, right? He just needs a signature move. He lacks kind of a pizzazz on the court where a player like Montrezl Harrell kind of resides in pizzazz and not his game.
Was this a case of Knicks management from a couple years ago kind of missing the boat on what Knicks fans want? Like going back to a rambling, tough guy who kind of plays like Mason and does all this stuff and is serious and kind of mean on the court. That's like what a Knick is supposed to be. Because fans aren't responding that well to Randall, even while acknowledging his numbers.
Yeah, I agree. The organization misreads us all the time.
Like he feels like a 90s Knick that should be well liked by the fan base. If RJ Barrett was putting up 23, 12, and 7, people would be losing their minds.
When Obi Toppin slams and jams his way to inside the Knicks heart, the heart of the Knicks fan base, his numbers might not look this good as Randall now, for sure. But
I mean, they're really outstanding numbers.
He's an all-star right now, for sure. I think it's because he's looked bad on other teams. It's just optic, right? I am also not hugely into him as like a building block of a player. I mean, he's only 26. That's not that old. But I don't see him in the Knicks' future because I think the game has kind of outdated him. Like, to be fair to Knicks fans, or out progressed him, whatever. To be fair to Knicks fans, David Lee didn't really catch on either, and he was a all-star in New York when he was here, and then later in Golden State and won a championship. But like, we never really gravitated towards Knicks. This is like a point guard country, right? Like Emmanuel Quickley, people are like, well, we could have gotten Halliburton, but would you rather not have Emmanuel Quickley? I'm like, no, Halliburton's the one. But I think we're really seduced by flashy players, and Quickley is the savior, and Randall is expendable.
Yeah, it was just as someone who always talks about what Knicks fans want and what the organization believes that the idea of a New York Knick is supposed to be. It's funny that Randall fits that so cleanly and yet is widely disliked. But Emmanuel Quickley, it's like there's murals being, thrown up citywide, like IQ.
I mean, a good branding, right? The letter Q, the letter Z, Zion, like all these things help. His name is fucking Quickley.
I mean, fantastic name, fantastic initials. He looks good. I'm in.
I'm in on Quickley too. Would I rather have Halliburton in a nanosecond, right? Sure. And Halliburton's boring, and I don't think the Knicks fan base would gravitate towards him necessarily. It's like, oh, this is the guy you guys loved. I mean, he hit a game winner yesterday, but he's kind of like an Austin Rivers plus kind of guy. He looks like Austin Rivers.
Right, but they might, because I guess what I'm trying to get at is, are we seeing a change in what Knicks fans want from the organization?
I Maybe so, and your point is correct. But remember, like Linsanity was our dream, and I'm not just talking as an Asian dude. I think the city loved what that was, and Knicks management kind of threw that in our face, right?
I mean, right, there were extenuating circumstances with
sure.
the poison pill contract and things like that. But there was some resistance to Lynn as well from some Knicks fans. Kind of like,
That's kind of rooted in more of a MAGA thing, right?
I don't know. I don't know. I think that face puncher Knicks fan may be less of a fan base than it used to be, or maybe just the ones that I'm exposed to now.
I would say the face puncher community is like kind of, I mean, I think barbecues are still popular, but the grill masters are kind of like not in our zeitgeist like they used to be. And I think the new generation of like quickies and these players talking about rest and where they would love to play and playing with their friends and playing for themselves instead of the flag, right? And I think that is we should pay attention to that when we talk about players like Randall. To your good point that like Knicks fans don't necessarily want New York enforcers. We kind of want a lot like root for someone with personality.
Yeah, because all the Knicks gave us last year was face punchers. Like, here's a Morris, here's a Taj Gibson, here's a Portis. Like, what do? They punch faces. They will make sure that the garden is respected, or they will bounce the ball off your forehead. And everyone said, I hate this team. Like, this team is revolting.
Super annoying, right? And not only I do think New Yorkers think they're tough and all that stuff is still real, but I think in sports, after years of Steph Curry proving us right or wrong, depending on where you came at him from, I think Knicks fans can see that like face punching has not worked for 20 years. A little face punching is always welcome.
Oh, you gotta love a small jab to the chin.
Yeah, I love Patrick Beverley, but he's surrounded by and the more I ended up playing with Beverley, the Clippers are more face punchers than anybody in the league, but they surrounded those two guys with like players with or without personality and who are actually good at playing basketball instead of like just knocking someone to the ground.
Depends on what you want.
Yeah.
But you brought up Steph Curry, and there's been a lot of talk about Steph Curry lately. And it was sort of based on you forgot about Steph Curry? Where's the respect? How dare you? And I compared him to Fury Road, Mad Max, which was, no, we didn't forget about Steph Curry. It was like a couple years ago. He won all the awards. Like, everyone knows how great Steph was. So I found those debates about Steph's greatness kind of strange and pointless, because everyone knows that he was a top 3 or 5 player in the NBA for several seasons. He won 2 MVPs back to back, where we all agreed that he was a deserving candidate. No one was mad about those outcomes.
Well, not to interrupt you, I believe in my opinion, you're skipping a step ahead.
Okay.
The original, I think, reaction was when he had a tough beginning, first 2 games of the season, people were like, see, he can't do it without better players. And then that's when the reaction was like, no, he's great. Give him some time, or, yeah, every good player has good teammates. I think the knock was he can't do it without Durant, Dre, and Clay.
I mean, that's true. And, even someone like Dame Lillard kind of voiced that opinion in an interview where he was saying, oh, you'll see it's tougher for him like it's tougher for me.
Fucking Lillard gets a pass, man. Someone drops like 90 points on his dome, and everyone's like, Lillard, what a generous player. Like, what dignity he had to absorb that punishment. Like, what? Lillard figured it out. I need some of what he's got, which is celestial sleepy time tea.
See, I mean, I think Steph's greatness is undeniable. We know he was the best shooter of all time and is the best shooter of all time, however you want to put him in
Why do you just make him a shooter, though?
I mean, one of the best guards in history, agreed.
A top 5 player, maybe.
I mean, all right. So this is one of those weird debates, right? Mm-hmm. When we say he's a top 5 player ever, are we just talking about a pickup run where you're picking players and saying, okay, Steph's the 5th best here. Mm-hmm. Okay, Kareem, you're 3. Oh, there's LeBron and MJ and Durant and whoever. All right, Steph goes 5th. Is that what we're doing, or are we talking about what they accomplished?
A little of both, right? It has to be a combination of wherever you stand on that, and then you take the consensus of whatever combination someone values.
Right. I think
the
sort of who they were at their peak is a fun and more interesting way of looking at these debates. Mm-hmm. But it also doesn't work because Tracy McGrady was the best basketball player on the planet in 2003. On the planet. Like, on that list, Tracy McGrady should be like number 7. But no one in the right mind would ever put him there because Tracy McGrady did not have playoff success. He didn't play much in his first couple years. He got hurt, and I think he blew out his knee. He had an abbreviated career.
He was known as being sleepy and lazy, right?
Right. But he was the best basketball player on the planet in 2003.
To me, he's right there with Kobe. Yeah.
So if it is a peak thing, I mean, he was clearly better than Kobe at that point. Clearly. So if we're going to use those kind of like gradients, just like player at their peak, then that top 10 list goes crazy.
I love it. I love the chaos. Yeah.
No, I think that's fun, but that's not how typically we do this, though. Right? It's a combination of what you value. But that's where Steph is an interesting case because Steph is only a 6-time All-Star. And I'm not using All-Star appearances to gauge how great someone is,
the BMM.
But more to look at their duration of excellence and how long they were considered a star.
It's a metric.
Yeah, it's a metric. It's not that you were on it. It's more like, what was your sort of sphere of influence? And for Steph, it was like 6 years there, right? And, you compare that to someone like Isaiah Thomas, who I don't think is nearly as good, anywhere close to as good as Steph Curry. But he was a 12-time All-Star, Guys like LeBron and Kobe, like 16, 18 years. Iverson, 10 years. You know who else has 6 years? Paul George, Kyrie Irving. You would not put any of those guys into that conversation. So that's why Steph is a unique case to me because we know how great he is. He is unparalleled as a shooter. Back-to-back MVP. Those are unimpeachable qualities. But he was a superstar for 5 years, and 3 of them had Kevin Durant on his team, who might have been better than him.
Oh, definitely.
Steph kind of fucked around for like half of his prime on a team that no one cared about, that no one really accepted as being a valid championship team, and like that's what he gave us.
I thought he burned brighter, sort of to your Tracy McGrady point. His All-Stars were consecutive, 6 in a row. Before that, from the age of 21 to 24, he was not an All-Star. I'm looking at his numbers now. Maybe at the age of 24, he averaged 23 points, a bunch of threes, but he really exploded in 2014. And that explosion I thought was so nuclear, and we had never seen anything like that. And it was influential. All these things you want to frame it around were so powerful that it puts him in, it almost eclipses what Tracy McGrady, the amazing things he did, because Steph Curry, I think, took it to this level that we had to reorganize statistics to kind of drag him back into orbit, because someone was eventually going to do it, but he had hacked the mainframe, right? And he was rolling around in his rollerblades with spiky backpacks being like, what if I just do this insanely valuable thing, which is shoot free throws and shoot threes, until I win a bunch of championships? And we can add Kevin Durant, and he's the better player. Oh, clearly, I think, in my opinion. And I'm gonna be cool with it. I'm just gonna be the most dangerous player on the perimeter that the game has ever seen.
Yeah, and as much as we make fun of someone like Kobe Bryant for being a sociopath and so driven towards his own legacy, ousting Shaquille O'Neal from Los Angeles in order to seize the reins of the league's most, winning franchise. I mean, Boston, that was a bunch of dry well repairmen playing basketball. But, Kobe did things that were even to the detriment of his own team that served the purpose of elevating his legacy over and over. Mm-hmm. He played with one of the best front lines in history with Bynum and Gasol and Lamar Odom, and would shoot more shots than them combined, despite the fact that they were all more efficient than him. Kobe squeezed every ounce of credit from team victories into his own cup. Mm-hmm. And he deserves to be roasted for it. At the same time, he did that. Yep. And that's the thing with Steph. It's hard to give him credit for things that he hasn't done. Mm-hmm. Hey, look, Steph went to 5 consecutive finals. I know, but the only one that he won without Durant, LeBron was the best player in the series. Iguodala won MVP. And the Cavs didn't have Kyrie or Kevin Love. Yeah. And, Steph is kind of a chiller. And if he wasn't protective of his legacy, which he has not been, it's hard for us to say, let's do that for you.
Yeah. Yeah, he flies in the face of Jordan originalism. Mm-hmm. He kind of contradicts everything grill masters hold valuable, which is, wanting it more, being a sociopath on the court, getting accolades, post-game interviews. Steph, I think, me and you years ago talked about how the Cavs versus the Warriors was kind of a fascinating matchup because it was a class kind of narrative, right? You had this poor kid from Akron who built himself up to be the best player of all time. And then you had NBA royalty in Clay and Steph, who grew up in the NBA, sons of very, very successful NBA players, and was part of the culture, they're insiders, where LeBron was an outsider. And I think that kind of upbringing plays a lot into the way Steph Curry behaves to the media, or when Andre Iguodala gets the Finals MVP, Steph is like, "That's my dude. We did this." And Kobe, I think, would have been like, "Well, don't forget."
Kobe just never would have allowed it.
Yeah,
he would have rather lost the series.
Yeah,
than not put himself in position to make sure that he won the MVP of the Finals.
And there's an awesome thing about that, right? I want the Democrats to do that in the next 2 years. Be like that. And there is, Kobe obviously is celebrated for it, but even me as kind of a death row verse. Shout out to Dr. Dre. Get better, Dr. Dre. Mm-hmm. Jesus. Yes. Legend. But as someone who grew up in that, I was born to dislike LA teams, and even my dislike of Kobe, I can acknowledge that he did something amazing and generous, which is he was that guy, he was that villain. And Steph is not giving us any of that. Steph is just guys, I'm hurt, or I'm cool, or I'm laughing, and and I don't want to dismiss the psychotic drive it takes to get to this level of an athlete or in your profession, and Steph has all of that. But as soon as he's there, he's like a joyful kid still, right?
I don't think there's any problem with Steph's approach. I find it refreshing. Mm-hmm. I think it's cool. And I just also don't think he can have it both ways. I don't think that...
Or we can have it both ways.
Well, I'm saying him in terms of his all-time legacy, but right. We, as part of this conversation, right? Yeah. It's not his fault that he showed up in the league and split time with Monte Ellis or had ankle issues.
The God.
Not his fault.
Yeah.
It's not Steph's fault that he got hurt last year and missed virtually the entirety of the season. That's not his fault. But, shit happens. And when you look at the amount of time that Steph has been the man, and that's where I was using, all-stars just sort of as a mm-hmm. way to quantify that, mm-hmm. he's kind of spent 13,000 minutes, somewhere in that range, 13,000 career minutes as the man. Someone like Allen Iverson, by the same age, had spent 25,000 minutes as the man from the moment he stepped into the league. Same with someone like LeBron or Isaiah. I just feel like you got to give guys credit for doing that. For James Harden, has been doing this in Houston for 8 years straight, just day in and day out, being the focal point, running the offense, putting so much on their own shoulders, absorbing the blame for losses, and just the drudgery of doing that over and over and over. It's something that Steph has not seemed that interested in doing it.
And that's why I think he's like a progression of all these Jordan ideas. And you're right, like he did not sustain. I mean, he's still in his prime, I think, and he is having also an MVP type season currently. But you're right, Steph kind of didn't want that smoke, and neither did Clay. And when Durant joined the team, he wanted all of that. And they kind of looked at him like, who's this old head over here who cares about like all this stuff that we don't? And I love Durant. I love his surliness, and I love that he's willing to take this on because it gives us something to talk about. But like, I acknowledge Steph's kind of like just watching like these kids fawn over like MF Doom, like Earl and Odd Future, and to recognize what they love, but also behave totally differently. I feel like I think about Steph in that way. It comes down to that gif that we always see of CP3 doing the shimmy, Steph shimmy in his face, and Steph just like laughing. Steph is like, you're awesome, CP3. Like, you're the best. Like, this is fun. You know, let's go. Next possession. And I love that about Steph. But he will always suffer at the hands of grill masters because the old criticisms are coming to head again. Like, all you have to do is knock him down. He can't do this without better teammates. Now that Dre's back, he looks better. I'm like, yeah, because Dre is a genius, you know?
And again, I know I'm putting myself in the Tongs camp here. You know, like,
Let me see that tong.
Give me a dry rub, and I will show you the tongs.
Tong to tong to tong. Yeah.
But still, man, it's hard for me to put him in the same category as
For sure.
a John Stockton, who.
No,
but
I
mean,
love it. I love
but
it.
I'm saying I don't even like John Stockton in that way. But I'm like, you look 10 All-Star games, like, you know, first all time in assists and steals or whatever. I'm like, the guy put in work. You know, and I don't even want to. I'm not defending these guys and saying that if they showed up at that pickup run, I'm taking Stockton over Curry. Of course, I'm not. But I'm saying you got to give the guys who put in the work some credit. Like they grind, they rose and they ground.
Rest in peace to the green god, Casey Jones. But like, you know, he was more successful in his grind than any of these players.
Yeah, show me a little grind.
You know, like.
Like, will you put Curry ahead of Dwayne Wade?
Yep.
Dwayne Wade went to 13 All-Star games. That guy rose and ground.
He definitely
won how many chips? What? 2 with Miami, or I mean, sorry, 2 with the Heatles, 1 prior, 3 rings. He's got more like reputable rings than Curry. 13 years of relevance. I mean, some of those late ones were just like gimmies, but still, D Wade rose and ground.
It's amazing how he rose and ground being the best player on his team in both situations. Like, he didn't get a chance to play with LeBron or Shaquille O'Neal in his prime. He just did it by himself. No, but like Dwayne Wade is an extremely popular player. And I think the BMM, who kind of control the All-Star voting, kind of like are grill masters, and they're grilling quahogs and little necks, but it's still a form of Tong behavior, and I think they favor players like Dwayne Wade a lot because he's a grinder, right? And Steph Curry flies in the face of all that all-star stuff. Like, you can't make this kid an all-star.
While that's true, I agree with you. But Steph also does appeal to a different segment of the fan base.
Myself.
Like right. The more progressive people, the ones who said, Charles Barkley is a fucking idiot. What is he talking about? Yeah. So you rooted for Steph to rain threes and the Golden State Warriors to win. I was rooting for them until they went against LeBron, of course. But, like, you know, Golden State was incredible. Steph is the greatest shooter ever. I think their team, even without Durant, was probably the best team in NBA history and would have beaten the brakes off the Bulls with Jordan and Pippen if they were just time machined onto the same court. Yeah. But there is like a sort of neoliberalism. Yeah, I said it.
You love
neoliberalism of basketball media that does reward someone like Steph far over like an Iverson. I think there's almost an overcorrection in a way of Steph. Yes, but 3 balls, efficiency, the beauty of the game. He was unselfish, and also he's smaller. He's identifiable. He's He's a guy from a privileged background in terms of economics. He's smart. He's nice. He's a family guy. He's not Iverson,
Well,
basically.
well, isn't this Steph in a vacuum outside of Iverson? Isn't this like recency bias 101? Because like when he was with Mark Jackson, it's like he's not good. What's his problem? Like I thought he was going to be like the steal of the draft. The Knicks wanted him, and they missed out on him. And then when he turns into a superstar, they're like, hey, he's too small. But like, and when I mean recency bias, I mean what's happening now is like, what have you done for us lately? He's like, I broke my entire hand apart, and now I'm trying to get better. It's like, well, you're not. Maybe you're not that good. And he's like, do you not remember 3 years ago when I was that good? It's like, but then you had Durant. It's like, okay, when do you want to start this? Because outside of outside of shooting, like he's just a great basketball player.
What I'm trying to get into is that since Steph rose to prominence, I think there has been a shift in the prevailing attitudes of basketball media. And the Barkleys and Shaqs and the people who doubted three balls, the Phil Jacksons, were even mocked at that point. They were not the consensus that you can't win with threes. Like, no one believed that who knew anything.
Right.
Spurs did it. The Heat did it.
Yeah.
It was like a fake narrative that Curry and the Warriors would be exposed for their reliance on the three ball. Like, it was bullshit.
Yeah.
But even back then, that was not the prevailing sentiment from the media. The media loves Steph Curry. And I think it's even shifted further in that direction where, Steph is beloved by the media. And you do have like the voices of like, Steph's overrated. He couldn't do it without him. But but those are kind of marginal, right?
Yeah, and it's right. I mean, we're getting back to our original conversation. Like the marginal voices have like equal weight as someone who's put in 30 years writing about basketball. Because if you make a good joke about Steph, that probably gets more eyes than like a well-formed argument about him.
Well, right. Exactly. Like I put up a post saying that I didn't think on Twitter that Steph was that influential because the three-point revolution was already underway. And that became like, the Steph haters are out. They're denying that he was like this great player. I'm like, no, I think he was singularly incredible. And that when he played, allowed him to use that ability in a way that probably would not have happened 10 years earlier. In 1997, he unlikely would have put up 8 3-pointers a game because of how the sport was played. But that's not diminishing his greatness. It's actually elevating it. Like there's one Steph. You can't replicate him. You can try with someone like Trae Young, but Trae Young shoots 36% from three for his career. It's completely different.
Yep.
Like utterly completely different. Like Steph
43%. Yep.
Steph is a weapon that you cannot duplicate. It just doesn't happen. So that's kind of my thing with Steph was that like, I don't think he's that influential other than the conversation we were just having, which is that he showed that the boomers were wrong.
Right.
In like a public facing way.
Yeah, I like this idea of his influence maybe pulling back from his on-court influence and him influencing the discussion and the way we talk about players. I love this because right now the TNT guys who are awesome and they're such a relief to see after all the bullshit we've been through this year. They're like old buddies and they're just like doing the same song and dance. It's like, is Steph Curry that? Can we just knock him down? And I'm like, oh, I love this. Like nature is healing. But it has shifted, right? Because now they have more doubt. And Steph Curry's influence was the way, it's not that anyone was right or wrong. It's the way that we have to acknowledge that there's outliers and there's progression. And there's outliers like Allen Iverson, Steph Curry, and Trae Young. But this is not like necessarily a trend. And identifying that in a conversation about sports is like a new idea, right? And I think Steph was really helpful in that.
I actually think Steph and Iverson are really similar.
Yeah, they're awesome. I don't want to argue which one's better. They're both gods, man.
Yeah, I mean, they're both very similar. They are apex scorer / distributors of their generation. They're virtually unguardable in the way that very, very, very few players are.
Yeah.
If you put a gun to my head and said, who are the most unguardable players you've ever seen? It's like Steph, AI, Shaq, Harden, and Curry.
Yeah.
That's it. And I think LeBron is better than all of them, but he doesn't necessarily have that like unguardability.
KD too.
KD's up there. He's up there.
Yeah.
But we've seen people like give him trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
Those other dudes, you just couldn't guard one-on-one. It's
Well,
not possible.
Those guys kind of have outlier skills, right? Like Harden and Curry and Iverson offer perimeter skills that are really difficult to scheme around because a lot of it's such individual effort.
Yeah, it's a weird, like, the ability of unguardability.
Yeah, Kyrie Irving. Yeah,
Again, Durant, LeBron, better players, but don't necessarily have that one commodity of, like, not guardable.
yeah, and it's funny the some of the conversation that I want.
LeBron's and Durant are very close. Let me not. I'm not saying they are guardable particularly,
No.
but just in my experience, like visibly, you just can't put one guy on those other dudes and expect to like ever win.
This is a good point because I think Knicks fans will see Obi Toppin slam and jam and be like, he's unguardable. And then see Julius Randle and be like, he's guardable. But then Julius Randle will forever be the better player and be more efficient and all these things, accrue more stats and whatever. And I think that's an interesting thing. Another metric we have to put into talking about a player like Steph, aside from influence and success and accolades, is perception. And like, this is the whole dribble bias thing, right? Like, is he such like a captivating visual player that we overrate his skill, or do we rate it properly?
Yeah, I know, and I'm not a Steph hater at all.
No.
I think he's singularly incredible. I just have sympathy for the perimeter players like Iverson or Isaiah Thomas and Stockton who put in more time. And even Steph's recent outburst, where he dropped 62 points and with 40 seconds left in the game is sprinting up the court to hoist another three despite the team being up by 18. I'm like, what is this, though? What is this? Like, this is what motivates you?
Yeah.
It wasn't, season started, time to get out there and drop 40 and hope my team will win. It required people on Twitter talking shit for you to suddenly go out there and hoist up 31 shots and like 18 free throws over whatever he did.
Kobe did the opposite way, right? He stopped shooting in a playoff game to acknowledge his critics. But you make a really good point. Like, I think No Sin Bin is like, there's some athletes that do the work, like Muhammad Ali, right? And then you have Floyd Mayweather, who just comes in. It's like, I'm Money Mayweather. I make those bills, and I might be the best boxer of all time, pound for pound. And everyone's just like, no, but you didn't have to go through Ali went, which is true, right? Like, the grief Iverson had to endure in his life is mind-bending, and the grief that LeBron James has to go through and Kevin Durant and all these ballers, Isaiah Thomas, like, there is suffering there. And we saw that suffering in real time. And, we argued about it. We in my opinion, we didn't give enough sympathy to these guys who were kind of thrown under the bus. And they came out on top, in my opinion. And Steph Curry doesn't seem to have any of those dramatic moments in his history or his career. He's kind of the golden child. He was underrated in college, underrated in the draft, but kind of a golden. He was Mayweather, right? He came through and did what he had to do, which was to be a dominant player. And the backstory doesn't line up with Iverson's backstory, and the achievements that Iverson made off the court were significant, I thought.
I think the idea of Steph as the golden child is accurate, and people have criticized him for unfair reasons because of it, but I think there is something real there. And when we think about LeBron's career, how long it took him to win that chip, and how many times he was criticized, and how many times he was called a choker and a loser year after year after year, and the abuse that someone like Iverson took. But Durant, LeBron, having to answer questions on why they didn't win, why they let down the fans, why they let down their teammates, why they were inherently losers for so long.
Their jerseys were burned. Like, what the fuck?
You look at Steph and the Warriors, part of it is just total circumstances. But the year before they won the championship, they got knocked out in the first round. No one sat there and roasted Steph for that. No one gave a fuck. No one cared that they lost in the first round.
It was
No
a
one
different
cared.
kind of
No one
criticism.
cared.
Yeah.
But I mean, meanwhile, LeBron, of course, is getting, roasted left and right. But no
Still.
one cared
Yeah.
that the Warriors lost in the first round. And they didn't have to go through the wars of beating the Celtics or beating the Pacers or the Bulls, whoever. They missed the Spurs. They missed Lob City. They missed, who else? The Lakers, yeah, whatever. They didn't have like a Western Conference rival, in part because they were so great. But the way it worked out, they never really had that struggle where we got to know them as a team and that narrative of, MJ, Jordan originalism. He beat the Pistons. He did it. He learned how to win. He got tough. They lifted weights.
Bulls didn't
All
beat
that kind of
anybody.
bullshit.
Yeah.
But, we saw that with LeBron and we've seen that with like
LeBron,
Tim
yeah.
Duncan and Kobe and all these other guys. And the Warriors just sort of arrived, won 5 championships and bounced.
You can't blame them, right? They were like, anybody
No.
want some of this? And everyone's just like, all right, Dirk Nowitzki.
But that's kind of why the Durant shit was so unfair.
Yeah.
They lost, even though they had the best record in history, then re-upped in a way that they couldn't be beaten, and then disbanded.
Yeah.
They didn't even give us the proper rise and fall of a dynasty, and I think that's why they don't feel like one.
Yeah, they were day trading. They saw a way to do it, and I think they would have loved to have kept Durant, but it didn't really. Yeah, the narrative doesn't fit. Like, Curry really benefits from being on the same team that drafted him too. The minute he asks for a trade, like Paul George, he's gonna get roasted because these are all originalist ideas, right? Like loyalty, whatever that means. Whatever framework you have for loyalty, like loyalty to the flag. Did you see yesterday? Someone was waving a Georgian flag, but it was the country of Georgia, not the state of Georgia. I love that. It was a beautiful
I like
flag.
that.
And I was like, that's not from our country.
But yeah, I think we'd have a different perception of the Warriors if, for example, in that playoff series, or excuse me, that playoff, that postseason when they won their first championship, if the Spurs, who had just annihilated the Heat, annihilated them, like that was that brutal 6-game, I think it was 6 games, just crushed the Heat. But they lost in the first round to the Clippers, who then lost to the Rockets, who then lost to Golden State. So like Golden State's first championship, we never got them, exercising the spirit of Tim Duncan's Spurs. We didn't get them beating Lob City. They played like Memphis, then someone else. I don't know. The only real series we can remember is the one with OKC, which is of course tarred because they came back from 3-1 and then Durant left.
I love this because I love the transitive theory, and you're doing the boxing thing, which is so fun, right? No sin bin. Mike Tyson, nerds would say Mike Tyson couldn't be the greatest pound-for-pound boxers because he didn't fight anybody. But then the reaction would be like, but he beat everyone that was available to him. So what do we do? It's like, I don't know what we do. Whatever your taste is,
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that you play who's in front of you. It's not your responsibility to generate opponents.
Yeah.
In boxing, that may be a little different because you can actually choose your opponent in boxing.
But the field, right? It's inventory. It's like there's no Foreman to his Ali.
But all these things kind of dovetail towards Steph in a way that is not complementary to his legacy.
Yeah.
He doesn't really care about it. They didn't really beat anybody that was that great except for OKC, and that became like a blemish. They added Durant, then they disbanded. A lot of these things add up to me looking at him and saying, I want to see you do this for a couple more years. That's it. I want to see you get in the trenches, average 30 for the next 2 or 3 seasons. And I don't care if you're a 5th seed. That's cool. Just do the work at 32 years old, 33. Just lead the league in scoring a couple times. Be insanely good. Be arguably the best perimeter player in the league. Just do it for a couple of years. And then I'm good with it. I'm fine. Okay, cool. You're a top 7 player of all time. I'm not asking for that much. Just a little sweat equity, some elbow grease.
This is what I'm asking for the Sixers. Like, can you beat anyone that isn't Terry Rozier? I just want to see it. I know you have the best record in the NBA, but you played Rozier twice. Gordon Hayward, who was probably in DC.
Hey.
I mean, are the Sixers real? Are they as real as Steph, or is
Well, the Sixers' strength of schedule is mediocre because the teams they've played actually are fairly good on defense. They have not played good offensive teams except for Washington.
and their
But-
numbers are skewed because they played the Sixers?
Right, but they beat the 5-3 Knicks. They
Oh,
beat the
that's quite an accomplishment.
They
Yeah,
beat the
okay.
Orlando Magic, who were 4-0 at the time of their
Right.
game.
Aaron Gordon.
I hope
Hive.
the boy Fultz gets better. That's
That sucks.
shitty news. The guy's been through a lot and can't catch a break. So
He's young. He made his money. And we're rooting for him.
yeah, he is financially taken care of. Glad he got that extension prior to the season, and hopefully he recovers fully.
Yep.
But I guess what I would say about the Sixers is the defense has been the best in the NBA thus far. I would be remiss not to mention that their starting unit last season with Al Horford and Josh Richardson was also either the best or second best in the entire league out of, 5-man groups who played a lot. So, like, it's not like they became a good defensive team out of nowhere. But what is impressive is that they are this good so far on defense while adding pieces that are new and pieces that are better for offensive basketball. So right now I think they have the third best net rating in the league. Their offense is, I think, 12th, but it's really spiked over the last few games. So far they look really good. I don't really even have any major takeaways other than that, like, the starting unit's really clicking.
Yeah, and I think they've been very fortunate, whether that be preparation or timing or whatever you want to call it. But their players have been clicking. You get Seth Curry to do one thing, and he's definitely done that one thing. You get Danny Green to do a couple things, and it turns out he can still do those things. And things are working out according to plan. There hasn't been an injury. This team, and I feel like this is Groundhog's Day, but they have a chance at winning the championship with no doubt. And there's a long road to that place, and a lot of things can happen, but being this prepared is so far a good thing. So I want to see what Morey does at the trade deadline, because he surely will shine this a little bit to be brighter when they enter the playoffs. But this team is not only fun, you got a get out of jail card, man. You were looking at a team that was facing relegation, just like ripping this team apart piece by piece, trading away Ben Simmons for the sum of his parts, right? Instead, you guys are the most exciting team in the NBA.
2 seasons ago when they added Jimmy Butler, I said, I think this is a championship core.
They had Jimmy Butler.
And they laughed at me. Well, Last season, even despite the mutant roster, I was like, this team has a chance to win a title. They got swept. I was laughed at.
They mocked me.
They taunted me online. Whoa. So I feel the same way. I think Ben and Joe are phenomenal players. And if you have them on your team, you have a chance to win a title. And this year, with better fitting parts, I think they have a reasonable chance. I don't know that they have, the best chance, but they're up there. They're in the mix,
sure.
A lot of it comes down to health. A lot of it comes down to who gets hot shooting the ball for a couple game series. If Seth Curry, sorry, I forgot the better Curry. Seth Curry, if he has if he shoots 55% from three, then the Sixers are going to be tough to beat.
Yeah.
They're just going to score a shit ton of points because Ben is good, Joe is good, Tobias is playing well, and then you have this freak who has a true shooting percentage of like 80%.
Tobias Harris, aka Net Hero. Go off.
But yeah, I've my stance has remained really consistent when it comes to Ben and Joe. I think they are incredibly good players who have been underrated not only by the basketball world in general, but by the Sixers' own fan base, which is a shame because those are the people who are supposed to be in your corner. And just talking about this year's team, they've taken a different strategy where they're playing the starters together almost all the time. And Brett Brown always like split Ben and Joe up. So it's cool seeing them play a lot together. I don't know if, as a long-term plan, the Sixers can have a bench that doesn't have one of those guys on the court. But it's cool seeing them develop a rhythm and a chemistry with the starting unit, and then with Shake Milton coming in and swapping out for Danny Green at times. It's nice seeing that group together, and then they leave, and all the young guys and Dwight Howard kind of come out and horse around for a while, even though it hasn't been that effective. It's just a different approach. And, early on I thought that Simmons, opportunities to be a creator might diminish a bit, within this group, because so much would be based on Embiid in the post, etc. But over the last couple games, I think Simmons is averaging something like 19 or 20 potential assists. Like, they're starting to kind of get it rocking. And one of those games, I think he had 22 potential assists and only ended up with 6. But it was like indicative of how this is going to work. Like, Ben is still going to be one of the league's best distributors, playing next to Joel Embiid, who's like an MVP candidate, and some shooters. That starting unit's a problem, almost a conundrum, or an imbroglio, if you will.
Predicament. Yeah, man. And I think moving through the season, I would just love to see the Sixers kind of ease the load, to de-tib this starting lineup a little bit and save them. But they are riotously fun to watch. And they have characters, they have different components that when it all clicks, it's like, it feels like it's a plan. And it's cool. I'm jealous. But yeah, everything has come true this season. Can we talk about some teams that are underperformed? What is going on in Toronto?
From what people are saying, and I don't know how true this is, it might be a product of them being in a real shitty situation.
Oh, you mean not being in their home arena, away from home?
And if they were successful, we could probably build a case that that's why they were successful. Well, they're down there, they're united, they're not distracted by their families. Some of these guys have children. But I'm kind of willing to accept it. Their lot sucks.
Yep.
So, sure, fuck it. Yeah, they're losing because they never play a home game, and they don't eat a home-cooked meal, and they don't get to see their, favorite Toronto landmarks. They can't see the CN Tower out of their window.
Yeah, what is the most famous landmark? Drake? Anything Drake gets.
It's the Toronto CN Tower, come on.
Right, I know.
Sheesh. Young Street, Carabana.
I would love
Late
to go
90s,
to Toronto.
let's
I've
go.
never been there.
I've been there like 30 times.
Why so much? What is your
It's
deal?
near Rochester.
Oh, represent. Right. I have a different theory. I agree with you too. But the alternate,
It could be totally false. I'm saying I'm willing to buy it for the time being.
the multiverse of theories, I would say Pascal Siakam might not be the star we want him to be. He's a really, really good player. He's had a tough start to the season. He had a kind of a down-ish year last year. He kind of flamed out in the playoffs, like visibly. But I think he runs into kind of a subtler version of what we're doing to Luka Doncic. It's just like, okay, so Siakam is an all-star, second-team All-NBA, done. Toronto has their superstar that is Kawhi Leonard. It all lines up. I'm like, don't do it to this kid. He's really, really good, but as we're seeing this year, maybe, their failures are like the projection of him as this pillar of this team. It's Fred VanVleet. I think VanVleet as a guard has taken over this team a little bit, and it's just not enough. They've lost a few close games. I still see them in the playoffs and in imbroglio in the playoffs, but I think we need to give Siakam a break.
Last year they had a really inventive defense, tons of traps. They gave up a lot of 3-pointers, which seemingly was by design. In the same way that the Bucks did. I think losing Ibaka and Gasol really did hurt them, even though those guys are long in the tooth and may not be building blocks for the future. I think losing them and replacing them with younger alternatives. I think Aaron Baines is a good player.
I like him.
I think Chris Boucher or is it Boucher?
Boucher, coup d'état, Boucher.
Yeah, he's played well, but Gasol and Ibaka are kind of two of the premier kind of floor spacing defensive bigs in the NBA, and I think that's going to hurt you on both sides of the ball. So I don't know. They've shot really poorly. That might change, and their offense will improve. I'm just not sure that they have the same talent level that they did. It's kind of that simple.
Yeah, I agree. And, Gasol for sure. And Ibaka has whiffs of NBA genius to him. He's always been a wise player, I thought. And to take those two guys off the court, like 2/5 of your brain off the court and replacing them with like whatever, Alex Len, Boucher, respect to these guys, but OG's playing more, but like taking those two thinkers off the court is a big deal. And I think we're seeing a little bit of the results of that kind of thing. But
I'll be honest, looking at their numbers, Baines has fucking sucked this year.
Yeah, something's wrong.
And that's one of those kind of, he's playing half the center minutes. That might cost you 3 games by itself. Baines just fucking sucking. Like, ooh, we lost because he was terrible again. And now we lost a game by 5 that we would have won by 3 because Baines shat the bed like a large Australian.
I mean, Boucher is like a menace at rim protection, but he's like, they need to make some moves. So I was watching the flagship BMM show, as I do almost
Rounders?
every day. The re-roundables. And they were saying, carry on, that the Raptors should fold it up and trade Kyle Lowry to the Clippers. And I was like, this team has still got it a little bit. They might trade Kyle Lowry. There would be a market for him on those streaks. But, like, it's too early to fold this team, especially when they're, like, right up against the Celtics in a 7-game series, right?
Well, perhaps they could trade Lowry to the West and Siakam to the West and maybe just keep Van Vliet and trade everyone else to the West.
Yeah.
And that could be a good strategy for them going forward. I don't know, maybe Philly would like to get involved in one of those deals and send Ben Simmons to the West. And, Giannis, maybe.
Everyone's
Bucks,
talking about the Knicks, but
maybe you could send Giannis to the West.
Maybe the Knicks should sell Quickly High and send them to San Antonio for cap space to pair with all those other guards.
Get Randall to the West.
For cap space and draft picks. But it was shocking to see like Paul Pierce and Kendrick Perkins bailing on the Toronto Raptors because
hard to believe.
Yeah, it's a bit early and the team isn't perfect, but what team is except for a handful of these dudes?
Look, we can talk about the failures of the Raptors. We can talk about the unsustainability of the Sixers. But let's focus on what matters. Peyton Pritchard.
You just want another the steal of the draft, I believe.
Rookie of the year, front runner, as far as I'm concerned.
Ainge did it again, man. The Celtics are squeaking by, but they're squeaking by.
I don't even care about the Celtics right now. When Kemba comes back, they've got a lot of individual scoring talent. I think their story is going to be the same. Can they turn those guys into playmakers? Can they cumulatively help each other score, or is it just taking turns getting buckets? And that was kind of what they did last year, and it works, but I think it runs into some problems when you can't find mismatches as readily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. A lot of these teams are built for winning games against teams now, but the Clippers are going to have to make an adjustment with Montrezl Harrell. I do believe the Celtics need kind of the Gordon Hayward player again, that kind of Swiss Army knife offensive player, the Chud, with the 4 kids and the gaming career. Woo, multitasker on and off the court.
Look, I'm saying it's possible that in the aggregate you can amass that kind of playmaking from Tatum and from Jaylen Brown and from Kemba Walker and from Peyton Pritchard, whatever. But I'm saying you can collectively do that. But I think it is tough when you can't go into a playoff series and say, all right, we have pretty much the best player on the court, and we're going to rely on that guy to sort of set the table for everyone else. And that's where they ran into trouble against Miami, because they just didn't have that one guy who you could say, all right, we've got the best dude on the court. Because Miami had the best two players in that series. Mm-hmm. And it's tough beating teams when they've got the best two players in the series. And I think that the Celtics are going to run into that kind of situation when they go against really, really, really good teams.
Can we end this pod with your take on what's happening with Miami culture? As a day one as yourself, what is going on with South Beach culture right now?
It's that weird gradient court.
Is it like too psychedelic? Should it come with a warning?
Every photo I see of it, it looks like it's digitized.
It's awesome. It looks cool, man. The team is, I don't know.
It looks like an old school TV when you're adjusting, the color and the hue and the VH levels or whatever that shit is called from back in the day with like rabbit ears, and you're like, oh, what is going on with this TV?
Yeah, it's got that processed color to it, like a magazine back in the day. Hot takes bound. Printed and bound together with staples, but it is like when it's off registered, and you can see like the cyans and magentas.
It's exactly what it looks like.
And this team is also off registered.
Look, it's clear. Jay Crowder was the culture.
Wow.
They lost him. They went to Phoenix. Culture went with them.
I love
Respect
cookies.
Sun's culture.
Small face coffee.
Cookies.
Look the same.
I love cookies.
Cookies.
I love cookies.